Welcome to the Elokus podcast, and this is class number 20 in the Maamor Oteh, which is the second discourse of the great book B'Shoshe Hekdimu Tuf 5672 Tuf Reish Ayin Beis Terav. Okay, we were in the middle of chapter 8, and we were talking about trying to reconcile the two qualities of Atzilus. On the one hand, Atzilus is a revelation of what once was, just bringing a potential into revelation. So it's not something new. And in that sense, Atzilus is then more and closer to the Or Ein Sof, closer to the infinite. On the other hand, we say that even the Chachma of Atzilus, even the first feature of Atzilus, is already considered Yesh Me'ayin, something from new, which would make Atzilus very much part of the worlds and very, very much disconnected, so to speak, from the Or Ein Sof, to the point that it is considered completely Ein Aroch. It's considered completely, utterly inconsequential and utterly insignificant. So which one is it? So we were learning in the last class that we were going to reconcile this by perhaps differentiating the lights from the vessels. The vessels are going to be the element of Atzilus that is, since it's defined and limited, vessels are the primary definitions of Atzilus, and for that reason, definition versus the infinite is considered something from nothing, because you can't really find the definitions, the defining qualities of the spheros and the attributes, to find them in the infinite source. It doesn't exist there, because lav mikol inun midos iu klal, because the Or Ein Sof doesn't have any of these attributes. But so that's why that would be Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing. However, the oiros, the energy flow that's in Atzilus, those lights, they would be reflective of the Or Ein Sof. They would be a direct emanation of the Or Ein Sof, and not a new entity. That would be the direction where he's going, but we're not there yet. It's going to take a few chapters till he fully develops this. So we just began that exploration, and what he's starting to do over here is that he said in last class that since Atzilus is a mediator between God and the world, between the Or Ein Sof, between the infinite and the finite creations, every mediator has to contain within himself elements of both parties that it is mediating in between, and that's why Atzilus itself is going to be a mixture. Atzilus itself is going to be some kind of a hybrid of, on the one hand, it's going to exhibit qualities of the Ein Sof, and on the other hand, it's going to exhibit qualities or the limitations of the creation. And so where do you have these both entities in Atzilus? He says that's going to be the Or and the Keli. So in this chapter, what he's primarily going to express is that the primary limitations that exists in the world of Atzilus are attributed to the vessels, to the containers, and that the lights are not limited. So he's going to differentiate that the lights are really limitless and undefined and doesn't have any specific personality and character. The light is very, very pashut, very simple, very undefined, and very infinite. And all the definitions that we speak in Atzilus are really the kelim. The kelim are what create or bring about in the vessels. There is already the definitions of kindness, wisdom, and all the other definitions. So they're which are the limitations. Once something is defined, but in a particular manner, a certain character, that's a definition, and that's a limitation. So the limitations are from the vessels, and the limitlessness is from the Or. Now, being, and here's very important, being that everything is so nuanced, nothing is just. Once you start getting into the deeper realms of existence and getting up and close, we find everything is nuanced. So he's going to have to navigate. In this chapter, he's going to do a thorough navigation, and he's going to find the opposites. In other words, he's going to challenge each one of these notions. This that we say that the vessels are defined and limited, and fixed, that he's going to challenge it by the fact that the vessels as well are brought about through the Or Ein Sof, through the infinite light. And since the vessels are brought about, they're rooted in the infinite light, how can the vessels be limited? And on the other hand, he's going to challenge the notion that we said that the lights are simple and utterly pure and undefined, and they're rooted in the Or Ein Sof of the infinite. He's going to challenge that by finding that the lights as well come about through the tzimtzum, which the tzimtzum is the limiting factor. The power of tzimtzum is contraction, the power of limitation. So in the vessels, he's going to challenge the notion of limitation by finding the limitlessness in the vessels. And in the lights, he's going to challenge the notion of its limitlessness by finding the limitation qualities and bringing the light. And he's going to challenge both sides of a coin, but his final analysis is going to be as follows: that although there's some degree of limitation in the lights, and in the evolution of the lights, in the coming about of the lights, there's some degree of effect that the tzimtzum, the contraction, has, which the tzimtzum is an element of contraction and limitation. Yet the primary idea of the light is the revelation of the infinite, and vice versa in the vessels. Although in the vessels there is somewhat in a interaction with the infinite lights that are producing the vessels, yet the primary cause of the vessels is not the lights, but the tzimtzum, but the contraction. So again, we're going to see in each one opposite features, but we're going to have to remember to put it into what is it primarily? The primary element of the lights is the lack of definition and a reflection of the Or Ein Sof, and it will come about through the Or, not through the tzimtzum. Although there is going to be a touch of tzimtzum on the light as well, or else it couldn't be lights for the universe, it couldn't be lights for creation. So there is going to be a touch of tzimtzum over there as well. And in the opposite, in the vessels, which their primary entity is to be limitations, and therefore they're sourced in the constricting force of the divine, which is the tzimtzum, which is the contraction, yet there is going to be notes of limitlessness in it. Okay, that's where he's going. I'm just giving you the gist of the chapter, of how this chapter is going to unfold in front of our eyes. But we're not there yet. What he's starting to explain over here in last class is that he brought a teaching from, and continuing in today's class, is he brought a teaching from the Avodas HaKodesh, Rameir ben Gabbai, a great Kabbalist, in which the Kabbalist says that since the Or Ein Sof, since God is perfect with utter perfection, you cannot relegate God to be only infinite. God must also have a power to be finite. He must also have a power of self-restraint. And he brings from the Avodas HaKodesh that Koach HaGvul, the power of limitation that God has. What's its first appearance? Where is it noticed? Where does it come into play? Where does it come into a detectable state? In other words, the power for God to self-limit and to restrain his otherwise infinite energy and be and affect in a limited fashion is always within Hashem, because it's God who is the omnipotent being who can do anything and therefore limit. But that power of limitation is so swallowed up in the infinity that it is not seen at all. It wouldn't be noticed at all. What's its first appearance? Its first notable state that God's is functioning with limitation is once the world of Atzilus comes about, and the kalim he brings from the Avodas HaKodesh the spheros of Atzilus, and the Rebbe Rashab over here interprets that to be the kalim of the spheros, the vessels of the spheros. That's the first limitation of the Or Ein Sof, and to support the notion that the vessels, the kalim of the spheros, of the attributes of Atzilus, are already limited, to support that notion, he brought a teaching from the Midrash, in which it says, Shir Kaima Shal Yotzei Bereshis. It gives a set measure for the height, the koma, the tall, how tall is Yotzei Bereshis, the one who formed creation. Bereshis is a reference for creation. How big is God, so to speak? God as the creator of the creation. It gives a limited number. it says that he's 2,360,000,000 parsa. And we mentioned that last week, and I said a parsa we brought you was close to 4 miles, and or 4 kilometers. No, miles, I think it was. And therefore, it would end up, I don't remember what I said, but whatever it was, and therefore it ended up to be over 5 billion. If you made it times 4, no, this is what it was. It was, give me a second, what did we say? 2 point, yeah, you have to double it for miles. A parsa, yeah, something like that. My calculation came up at about over 5 billion mile, which was a little puzzling. I mean, how can you say that? So it's interesting. I just want to make an interesting note. Last week, Thursday, I taught, we're in the course of another class that we teach over here, the Thursday night class, the same statement of the sages came up in that discourse. And there's a Maayor of the Tzemach Tzedek, and then I found the Maayor of the Rebbe Marash, which is a commentary on the Tzemach Tzedek's Maayor. And the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe, the fourth Chabad Rebbe, who's the father of the author of the book that we're learning now, of the Maayor that we are learning now. So he makes a little comment. Sometimes you find just this little comment, and it's very helpful. So when he brings this statement of the sages about the size of the Yotze Bereshis being, remember the exact word it was, 236,000 times 10,000 parsa, which when you make the math comes out to be 2,360,000,000 parsa. So he explains that the parsa that we're talking about are not the parsa that there is in this world. In other words, not the way these measurements are measured in with our measuring units, but the way parsa is above, which would mean much bigger, exponentially greater. Now, just to give an idea, he doesn't say this, but this is my own deduction. Since time and space are related to each other, and since we know that there is time in our world and there is time in the higher realms, but we know that the time in our world is far more broken down, which would mean that a small little tiny bit of time in heaven contains within it a huge amount of time down here. For example, it's one of the verses that say 1,000 years in your eyes is 1 day. That means by God, 1,000 years that transpire down here is just considered a day, literally 1 day past. 24 hours is 1,000 years. So and then we have to know when it says by Hashem, what is that referring to? Which level? Is that in the world of Atzilus? Where exactly is that reference? But whatever it is, what we're seeing is that what takes a very, very long time down here, which is very much, is very small up there. And that would mean that if we say 1,000 years above, that would mean millions and millions of years down here, in our state of time. If that's true about time, we can then apply the same thing to space. That if we're talking about the 5 billion miles that we're talking about is not to be measured, or the 2,360,000,000 parsa is to be measured in the parsa above. If that would be the case, if we would say apply the same concept, I don't even know what the ratio is to be able to make because again, there we say 1 day is 1,000 years. So how would that apply to the measurements of space? I'm not exactly sure. But based on that, we can understand that the number 2,360,000,000 parsa is an astronomical number. However, notwithstanding our incapability to be able to fathom the size of that and what that means, and how do you even apply size to the spatial elements to Yotze Bereshis. However, the very fact that we're even talking in those terms imply that there is limitation. And that's what he's saying. So where is that limitation? It doesn't apply to God himself, and it doesn't even apply, he says, to the oir that's in Atzilus. In other words, it applies to Hashem's manifestation, where God manifests in the 10 spheros of Atzilus. But in the 10 spheres itself, not to the lights, but to the vessels. And then he's going to add, and that's what we're learning, we're holding right now, not even to Atzilus itself, because that would be too much of a limitation. Even that astronomical number, it means when his influence leaves the world of Atzilus and goes into a lower world, it will create the space of 2,360,000,000. The energy then would then manifest in 2,360,000,000 parsa. And again, parsa, as we discussed earlier, is not the parsa that we know down here. It's in divine measurements. So we have no idea what that is. But the main point where he's going to is, as great as it is and as enormous as it is, the very notion that we're even attributing some element of spatial features is a sign that there is gevul, there is limitation to the vessels of Atzilus. So let's read that inside. So in addition to the fact that there are essential definitions in the spheroids, because there is chesed, kindness, and there is gevura, which is severity, and kindness and severity is a different type of energy, and that is attributed to the vessels and not to the energy, not to the not to the light. The vessels are what give that coloring or that limitation to the energy. But in addition to that, they also have a limitation. They have a limitation to their expansion. And for example, shir kaima, when the Gemara says that the height shall yoytze bereshis, or that either I'm not sure if it's a passage in the Talmud or a passage in the Midrash, but it's one of the two. It's a statement of the sages that says that the height of the yoytze bereshis, of the one who forms creation, reish lamed lamed vav alafim revavos, 236,000 times 10,000 parsa. Kimin yeverav koyach, which is equivalent to the gematria. Where did the sages take that exact number? They derived it from the verse. It says v'rav koach, that God's power is great. V'rav koach, and rav koach is the numeric value of these two words is 236. And from 236, they added to that, that is times 10,000 parsa'is, whatever that means. V'yesh loimar. But here he makes an interesting observation. The shir v'agbalazais, when we even give this astronomical number and apply it to the vessels of Atzilus, it is not to be understood that is to Atzilus itself, to the world of emanation itself, because since the world of emanation is still one with Hashem, because God unifies with that world and with those spheres till they become one with Him, we cannot even measure Him by that astronomical number. Therefore, we have to say that this measurement is its influence when it descends past the next filter into the lower world. Its power will be released with this measurement. When it goes into the next three worlds, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, and it will formulate and create the various different universes. Over there, its energy size, whatever that means, is this astronomical number. When it's drawn into the next world, into Bria, it's in this number. However, in the world of emanation, it's not in a measured, limited fashion. In their expansion, because they expand limitlessly in Atzilus. As stated elsewhere, the klolis in Yanagvul de Kalim, that the general concept of limitation that we are applying to the Kalim, to the vessels, who shetia behem, the al yadam, is that it should be in them and through them, hahagbala, the limitation, chutzla Atzilus, outside of Atzilus. In Atzilus itself, they are not limited, they're infinite, and their expansiveness is infinite. How much kindness is flowing, the power of that kindness is actually limitless kindness. How much judgment, limitless judgment. All these powers are actually utterly limitless. How much compassion, limitless compassion. Avo b'atzilus, it's only that as it gets translated into the actual universes of creation, it will affect in a limited manner. And that itself, the fact that outside of itself it would impact in a limited fashion, is a sign that it itself is limited. Because something that would be utterly limitless would not lend itself to being restricted. But in Atzilus itself, we can't, God forbid, apply true limitation. Avo b'Atzilus gufa, but in Atzilus itself, since Atzilus is still divine, einom b'pchinas gevul, it's not in a state of gevul, of limitation. Now, how he proves this idea that in Atzilus there is no limitation. At least not there is limitation in the fact that the features are features, that itself is a limitation. It's like if we would say the fact that we have blue and red and yellow, that itself is a limitation, because coloring it to one color is already a limitation. But how much blue is there? Infinite blue. And how much yellow is there? Infinite yellow. Okay? I'm using that just as a metaphor. And this idea that in Atzilus there is definition, but the definitions themselves are infinite in their state, but their effect is limited, but they themselves are in their own space are limitless. It speaks about the 10 spheroids in the book of formation. In the book of Yetzirah, it says that the 10 spheroids, their midah, their measurement is 10. However, she'ein lehem sof, they have no end. So you have a contradiction over here. They're 10, but each of those 10 are ein sof. It's explained elsewhere that this that we say that they are 10 and they are limitless, they have no end to it. One might suggest that when we say they are 10, it's referring to the vessels. And when we say that they are without an end, is the energy that's in it. The oil is without an end, but the vessels are limited. So therefore he says, no, it's explained that even the vessels of Atzilus, of the world of Atzilus, of the world of emanation, are limitless. She'ein lahem gevul, they have no limit. Kamoi she'ein ba'atzilus, when they are in the world of Atzilus, they're limitless. Avon makol makom, however, the influence of these energies when they pass into the actual stages of creation will be in a limited fashion in accordance to the number we mentioned before, 2.360 billion parsa, and whatever that parsa is mean in divine space, in heavenly space, and on space that is up in the higher realms, we don't understand even those numbers, the size of it. However, even though in Atzilus we're saying we might call it quantity and quality, and we might say like this: quality in quantity they are infinite, which means the measure of the energy is without an end. But in quality it's limited in the sense that that it is something specific. As we said earlier, it's blue, it's yellow, it's green. And once it's something specific, that is true even in Atzilus. That's why then Sefer Yetzirah it says their measures are 10. Number one, it calls them a measure. Midasam, their measure. That means it is measured. But then it says ein lo sof, to have no end. So then we would differentiate and say like this: qualitatively they're measured because there's something specific, 10 particular energies, which each one is infinite. However, nevertheless, gam kamoy shehein b'Atzilus, even the way they are in the world of Atzilus, hem b'pchinas mitzius, they are in a state of beingness and existence. Midos, they're in a state of a set measure, the kochos, and particular powers. So that is already a specification. Avala oirois, But that's only so it's because he gets so nuanced. See this? I'm going to feel for you because I go through the same pain when I'm studying this for myself. Because he weaves back and forth, and in each concept he goes deeper and challenges himself and goes further in because he wants us to have a thorough understanding. Sometimes we lose the forest for the trees. We're examining one particular tree with all of its details, and suddenly we don't even know in which forest we are. So it's continuous. That's one of the things I'm trying to do as I am teaching this. It might take a little more time, is to continuously bring you back to the thread so we don't lose the thread. So again, the thread of this chapter is that he's trying to differentiate and say that in Atzilus there are the vessels are the limiting are the limitations of Atzilus, and the lights are the unlimited part of Atzilus. So till now he's proving that the vessels are limited. And that's what we said earlier. The first exhibit of God's limiting power is in the vessels of Atzilus. Avala oiros, however, counter that to the lights. The light, the energy that goes into those vessels, einam b'pchinas mitzius. They are not, number one, they're not limited at all. They're infinite in terms of their expansion. But they're also not definable in a state that we should say it's yellow, blue, purple, or whatever. They're not a specific color. Which means, in his words, they're not in a state of a metzius. A metzius means they're not something. When something has definitions, it becomes a thing. But the lights, because they're pashut, they're simple, means that they're not a thing. And that's these words. Einam b'pchinas metzius. They're not in a state of somethingness. Midos. They're not in a state of measurement. Shaharehem, because they are ha'ora. They are a radiance from the infinite one, the emanator, because they are a reflection, a radiant light of who? Of the Orein Sof Hamatzel, of the emanator. And since God is not a thing, and he has no definitions, so his light that emanates is also not a thing and has no definitions and is limit and is endless. So the lights are a direct radiance of the Orein Sof. The Kalim, the vessels, are not a direct light of the Orein Sof, even though, of course, the Orein Sof HaMatzal, the emanator, produces the vessels, but he produces them through, we're going to see through the Tzimtzum. The vessels are primarily a production from the Tzimtzum, which is a blockage on God. They're not a continuum to Hashem. They're not a revelation of God like the lights are. The lights are a shine of God. God is shining of himself. God is revealing himself through the lights. Therefore, the lights are similar to him. And just like he is non-defined and limitless and boundless, his lights are also non-defined, limitless, and boundless. However, the vessels, since it also comes from God, but it comes through God interrupting himself, as we're soon going to see, blocking himself, interfering with himself. That's why they do come out in a state of measurement and in a state of they do become something. And that's the difference over here. That's the differentiation that he's making. The lights are not in a state of metzias, midos, and of emotions. They are a ray of the Orein Sof, the emanator. Who's not within the context of emotions or midos of measurements at all. So to the light, is also not in the geder. It's not within the entire context of limitations. As it is known, the root of all the lights of Atzilus, hemahakav, come from the kav, which is the line, that is really rooted and traced back to the infinite light that's before the tzimtzum. Let's leave this for tomorrow. Meanwhile, let Mashiach be heard today.